The town looked smaller than Lena remembered, as if time had folded it inward, compressing the streets, the houses, the quiet spaces between them. The sky hung low and silver, clouds stretched thin like breath held too long, and the air carried that familiar coastal dampness, salt, wood, something faintly metallic. It wrapped around her as she stepped out of the car, suitcase in hand, heartbeat slower than it should have been. She hadn't planned on staying long. That was the lie she told herself. The house stood at the end of the street, unchanged in shape but altered by absence. Paint faded, windows duller. It looked like a place that had learned how to wait. Lena paused at the curb, her fingers tightening around the handle of her suitcase, a quiet pressure building behind her ribs, not fear, not excitement, but something heavier. Memory, perhaps. Or anticipation she refused to name. Inside, the house breathed quietly. Floors creaked in recognition. The air smelled faintly of old books and coffee grounds. She moved slowly, as if speed might disturb something delicate, something still lingering in corners she couldn't see. That was when she heard him. Not his voice, just the sound of movement from the kitchen. A cupboard closing. Footsteps. Familiar in a way that unsettled her. Lena stopped. Her body reacted before her thoughts did, shoulders tightening, breath stalling mid-inhale. Years had passed, years since she last saw Evan in person, but the imprint of his presence hadn't faded the way she'd expected. It lingered, quiet and persistent, like a low note held beneath a melody. He turned when he sensed her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Evan looked older. Not dramatically, just softened at the edges. Lines at the corners of his eyes. A calmness in his posture that suggested solitude rather than loneliness. He wore a simple shirt, sleeves rolled up, as if he'd been in the middle of something ordinary. The ordinariness of it struck her hardest. Lena, he said, gently. As if her name were something fragile. Her name sounded different in his voice now. Less anchored, less defined. Hi, she replied, too quietly, the word dissolving between them. They stood there, suspended in a silence that felt thick with unsaid things. He didn't step forward. Neither did she. The space between them became charged, not with touch, but with restraint. I didn't know you were coming today, Evan said at last. I decided last night, she answered. Which was true, and not. The decision had been forming for months, crystallizing slowly, painfully. He nodded, a small movement, as if absorbing more than her words. You look different. So do you. A faint smile touched his mouth, brief, careful. I suppose time does that. She wanted to say more. Wanted to fill the space with something lighter, something safe. But the words tangled inside her, caught on the awareness of him standing there, fully real, no longer a memory softened by distance. They moved eventually, parallel paths through the kitchen, careful not to brush against one another. Their closeness felt intentional even when accidental, as if both were aware of exactly how far they could go without crossing something invisible. The kettle whistled. He turned it off. She watched the motion of his hands, steady, familiar. Too familiar. You're staying in your old room, he said. Not a question. Yes. Another silence. Loaded. Dangerous. Later, alone in that room, Lena sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall where a faint pencil mark still lingered, a circle she'd drawn years ago, looping and imperfect. She'd called it her secret circle back then. A place emotions could exist without explanation. Without consequence. She touched it now with the tip of her finger. Downstairs, Evan paused in the hallway, his gaze lifting briefly toward the ceiling, toward the room he knew she was in. His chest tightened for reasons he refused to examine too closely. Neither of them said it out loud. But something had begun. Morning arrived quietly, filtered through pale curtains and the muted cry of distant gulls. Lena woke with the sensation that she had been holding her breath all night, her chest tight, her thoughts drifting in slow, circular patterns she couldn't interrupt. The room felt smaller in daylight, shadows retreating to corners, memories stepping forward where darkness had kept them subdued. She sat up slowly, feet touching the floor with deliberate care, as if grounding herself might prevent the past from pulling her under. The house was already awake. She could hear movement below, soft, restrained, familiar. Evan's presence moved through the walls without sound, without demand, and yet it pressed gently against her awareness, a quiet gravity she couldn't escape. Downstairs, the kitchen was filled with the smell of coffee and toast. Sunlight slipped through the window in thin bands, catching dust in the air. Evan stood at the counter, his back turned, sleeves rolled again, posture easy but alert, as though he sensed her even before she spoke. Good morning, she said. He turned, expression calm, but something flickered behind his eyes, recognition, perhaps. Or caution. Morning. They shared breakfast in fragments. Small talk stretched thin between them, words carefully chosen, each sentence an offering placed gently on the table and left untouched. Lena watched him from the corner of her eye, the way he listened more than he spoke, the subtle pauses before he answered, as if weighing not just what to say, but what it might reveal. So, he said eventually, stirring his coffee though it no longer needed it, how long are you staying? She hesitated. I'm not sure. His gaze lifted to hers, steady and unreadable. That's fair. The simplicity of his response unsettled her more than questions would have. There was no pressure in it, no expectation, only space. And space, she realized, was far more dangerous. After breakfast, she wandered outside, drawn by the quiet. The backyard stretched toward the edge of the woods, unchanged, except for the way time had softened it. The old path was still there, barely visible beneath leaves and pine needles, leading toward a place she hadn't visited in years. The secret circle. Her feet followed memory without permission. It sat just beyond the trees, a small clearing ringed by stones she'd placed herself once upon a time, marking a boundary only she had understood. Back then, it had been a sanctuary, a place to sit, to think, to feel without explanation. She stepped into it now, breath catching as the past folded into the present. She hadn't expected him to follow. But she sensed him before she heard him, the shift in the air, the subtle awareness of another presence. Evan stopped just outside the circle, respecting a boundary he didn't know the origin of but seemed to feel instinctively. I used to come here when things felt loud, she said, surprising herself by speaking first. He nodded slowly. I wondered where you went sometimes. The admission landed softly, but it landed. You noticed. I did, he said. I just didn't ask. Something loosened inside her at that. Not relief. Recognition. She sat on one of the stones, fingers brushing the cool surface, grounding herself. He remained standing, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed yet restrained. The distance between them felt intentional now, charged with meaning neither was ready to confront. This place, he said after a moment, it feels important. It is, she replied. It's where I learned how to sit with things I didn't understand. His gaze softened, and for the first time, she saw something vulnerable flicker across his face, something unguarded. You always seemed older than your years, he said quietly. She laughed, a soft, breathless sound. I didn't feel that way. No, he said. I suppose not. Silence settled again, but this time it felt different, less strained, more intimate. It wrapped around them, heavy with the awareness of shared history, shared restraint. Later, back in the house, the afternoon unfolded slowly. They moved around each other with a careful rhythm, never colliding, never quite separating. Lena found herself hyper-aware of small things, the brush of air when he passed by, the way his voice softened when he spoke her name, the pauses that lingered just a fraction too long. At one point, she reached for a book on a high shelf in the living room, stretching on her toes. Before she could think better of it, Evan stepped closer, instinctively steadying her elbow. The contact was brief, barely there, but it sent a sharp, quiet jolt through her. She pulled back immediately. Sorry, he said at the same time she did. Their eyes met, breath suspended. The moment stretched, fragile and electric, before she looked away, heart racing. That evening, they sat on opposite ends of the couch, a movie playing unnoticed on the screen. The room was dim, shadows pooling between them. Lena hugged a cushion to her chest, the weight of unspoken thoughts pressing against her ribs. She wanted to say something. Anything. But the words stayed locked inside her, circling the truth she wasn't ready to name. Evan shifted slightly, as if restless. His gaze lingered on the screen, but she could tell his attention wasn't there. It was in the space between them. In the pauses. In the things neither of them said. When the movie ended, neither moved. I should, she began. Yes, he said, then stopped. I mean, take your time. She smiled faintly, standing. As she passed him, their shoulders nearly touched. Nearly. Upstairs, she lay awake long after the house had gone quiet, staring at the ceiling, the image of the secret circle replaying in her mind. Down the hall, Evan sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cold mug, thoughts drifting where he refused to follow them. Both of them felt it now. The slow, undeniable shift. And neither knew what to do with it. Morning returned with a fragile gold light that spilled through the curtains, soft and hesitant, as if the day itself knew the weight it carried. Lena stirred slowly, the memory of yesterday's moments pressing gently against her thoughts. She could still feel Evan's presence in the room, the invisible imprint of him sitting just outside her consciousness. She dressed quietly, careful not to awaken the house fully, but the sound of her own movements seemed amplified in the stillness. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled faintly of bread warming and coffee. He had started the day before her again, as always, quietly, deliberately. She paused at the doorway, watching him from the frame, and her chest tightened. He was reading, his head bent over a newspaper, lines of his face catching the sunlight in ways that made the room feel both intimate and dangerous. "Morning," she said softly. He looked up, startled for a fraction of a second, then relaxed, offering a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Morning," he returned, voice calm, steady. A deliberate distance lingered in the air between them, a careful boundary neither wanted to break yet both were drawn to test. They ate in silence, each spoonful and sip measured, heavy with unspoken words. Lena caught herself glancing at him, catching the light in his hair, the subtle curve of his jaw, the way his eyes seemed to search for something beyond the printed page. She looked away quickly, telling herself it was habit, though the ache in her chest said otherwise. Later, she wandered outside again, drawn by the magnetic pull of the secret circle. The path through the trees was familiar, yet changed in small, unsettling ways. Leaves had fallen differently. Branches hung lower. Shadows shifted. And yet the circle waited, steady and unmoving, a relic of a past where emotions could exist safely, where silence had been a friend rather than a weight. He appeared without warning, just a presence at the edge of the clearing, silent, steady. Lena didn't speak immediately. She sat among the stones, feeling the moss beneath her fingers, feeling the ache of memory, the pull of years she had refused to acknowledge until now. "I didn't know you'd come back here," she said finally. "I wondered if you would," he replied. His voice was quiet, carrying the weight of careful restraint. She looked up at him, catching the soft light in his eyes, seeing the way his expression softened, opening just slightly, revealing the vulnerability he usually hid. "You used to come here too," she said. He nodded, slow, deliberate. "Sometimes, when the house felt too loud, too full of things we couldn't name. I guess some things never really leave us." They sat in silence after that, letting the air fill with the sounds of the forest, leaves rustling, distant waves, a bird somewhere high and unseen. Each moment of quiet pressed against Lena's awareness, the nearness of him, the subtle pull of what she could not name, a tension that grew heavier with every breath. At one point, she caught herself tracing a line on the stone beneath her fingers, imagining it connecting to him, though she knew it couldn't. He watched her for a long beat, eyes soft but steady, neither moving closer nor stepping away. The day shifted slowly into afternoon. They returned to the house, their movements almost choreographed by an unspoken understanding. Evan prepared tea while Lena lingered near the counter, watching the steam curl, watching the subtle play of light and shadow on his face. Small gestures, the tilt of his head, the way he adjusted the mug in his hands, the brief pause before he spoke, became monumental, each one a pulse in the slow rhythm of tension that bound them. She remembered something from years ago, a fleeting moment when he had noticed her without words, when he had offered kindness without expectation. The memory felt electric now, like a thread she could reach for but dared not pull. She wondered if he remembered, if he felt it too. Evening came with its own quiet insistence, soft shadows pooling in corners, filling spaces between them with possibility and danger. Lena perched at the edge of the sofa, the room dim around them, heart aware of every subtle movement. Evan sat opposite, careful, restrained, as if both of them existed in a delicate balance, neither tipping forward, neither retreating. A movie played on the television, muted, as if the background hum of ordinary life could provide cover for the extraordinary pull between them. Lena clutched a cushion, warmth pressing against her, grounding her, even as her thoughts spiraled in quiet storms. He shifted slightly, glancing at her, not the casual glance of familiarity, but a measured, deliberate look that lingered just a fraction too long. Lena's breath hitched, chest tightening, and for a moment the world narrowed to the span of a heartbeat, the air between them charged with recognition of feelings unspoken. She rose, silently, moving past him to the hall. Their shoulders brushed, light, almost accidental, yet impossibly intimate. Neither spoke. Neither moved away immediately. The contact lingered, a quiet electric current passing between them. Upstairs, alone, Lena opened the window to let the cool night air wash over her. The moon was low, spilling silver light across the floor. Her mind replayed the day, the way he had looked, the way he had stayed just at the edge of touch, the way silence had carried more weight than words ever could. She felt the ache of restraint, the pull of what could not be named, and the undeniable shift that had begun in both of them. Somewhere below, Evan sat at the kitchen table, a mug in his hands, lost in thought, feeling the same slow, magnetic tension that tightened in her chest. It was only the beginning. And yet, already, the world had changed.